Kathleen Salcedo walked into the Wilson family estate wearing a simple white gown she'd chosen deliberately, because if she was going to dismantle a billion-dollar dynasty, she'd damn well do it looking like their victim. The groom waited at the altar, devastatingly handsome, eyes filled with shame he didn't deserve. Richard Wilson, the apologetic heir, son of the man who destroyed her father. 1 year of strategic marriage, one house full of vipers. One secret identity they had no idea was about to burn their world down. What happens when the pitied bride and the guilty prince start falling for real? And the family that ruined her father wants her humiliated next. Buckle up. This marriage is about to explode. If you're just tuning in, please like, subscribe, share, and click on the notification button for more engaging stories. Your support means everything.
This isn't just a story, this is a lesson.
Now let's dive in. Kathleen stood in the penthouse suite of the Montgomery Tower, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city her father once helped build. Financial reports covered the marble desk like battle plans. Her phone buzzed again. Another Wilson asset ready to be acquired. She let it wait. 32 years old, and everything she'd destroyed had been 20 years in the making. She heard the knock before she saw her advisor. Marcus Chen entered carrying a leather portfolio, his expression carefully neutral. The scent of expensive cologne and calculated strategy trailed behind him. Ms. Montgomery, we need to talk. Kathleen didn't look up from the contract she was reviewing. If this is about accelerating the Wilson acquisition timeline. I already told you I want to do this my way. Marcus set the portfolio down like it contained explosives. It's more personal than that. The words landed like an invitation. Kathleen finally turned. Her advisor's jaw was tight the way it got when he thought she was about to make a mistake. The Wilson family has approached, Marcus said carefully. Through intermediaries, Kathleen's pulse kicked hard. After 20 years of planning, they were coming to her. What kind of approach? Marcus opened the portfolio with steady fingers. Thick cream stock, embossed letterhead, desperate elegance. Wilson Holdings. A marriage proposal. They want you to marry Richard Wilson, the room sharpened. Marry him, Kathleen's voice was measured, revealing nothing. The son, the only decent one according to our intelligence, Marcus continued, watching her reaction. The family is drowning. They need a silent investor, a strategic alliance, someone they think is desperate enough not to ask questions. Your public profile as Kathleen Salcedo, the struggling consultant from Brooklyn, makes you the perfect mark. Kathleen took the papers. The contract was clinical. 1 year of marriage, public support, discretion. After 12 months, an amicable separation. They'd provide a modest settlement, clear her fabricated debts, and give her respectability. But the clause that made her smile was buried on page 7. Full access to family estate, company events, and private records as befitting a Wilson wife. They're handing me the keys to their kingdom, Kathleen said softly. They're handing you a cage, Marcus countered. This is dangerous, Kathleen. If they discover who you really are, they won't. Kathleen's eyes were cold as winter. Because all they see is a poor black girl grateful for the opportunity. They can't imagine I'm the one who's been buying up their debts for the past 8 months. They can't imagine I own the very banks foreclosing on their properties. Marcus leaned forward. And Richard Wilson, our intelligence says he's nothing like his father. He's tried to reform the company from the inside. He's been selling personal assets to cover staff pensions that his family stole. He might be innocent. Then this will be his test, Kathleen said, her voice harder than she felt. If he's complicit, he'll pay with the rest of them. If he's innocent, she paused, something flickering across her face. Then maybe he'll understand why I had to do this. Marcus closed the portfolio. Your father wouldn't want you to sacrifice your happiness for revenge. Kathleen turned back to the window. To the city glittering below like broken promises. My father is dead because James Wilson valued profit over human lives. I'm not sacrificing anything, Marcus. I'm collecting a debt. She picked up her phone, scrolled to the fabricated identity she'd maintained for years. Kathleen Salcedo, struggling consultant, no family money, no connections. Just desperate enough to be overlooked. Tell them I accept, Kathleen said. And Marcus, make sure my wedding dress is simple. I want them to pity me. Marcus stood, knowing there was no talking her out of this. When do you want to schedule the wedding? Kathleen's smile was sharp as a blade. As soon as possible. I've waited 20 years to walk into that house. I'm not waiting another day. After Marcus left, Kathleen pulled open the bottom drawer of her desk. Inside was a single photograph, edges worn from handling. Her father, young and proud, standing in front of the company he built before Wilson destroyed it. Before the stress killed him. Before Kathleen inherited not just his fortune, but his unfinished business. I'm coming, Daddy, she whispered to the photo, and they have no idea what's about to hit them. The phone buzzed. Another Wilson property about to fall. Kathleen answered this time, her voice shifting effortlessly into the soft, grateful tone of Kathleen Salcedo, the woman who didn't exist, but who would walk down the aisle in 3 weeks. Yes, she said sweetly, I'd be honored to marry into the Wilson family. Thank you so much for this incredible opportunity. The lies tasted like justice. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday, delivered by a nervous junior associate from Crawford and Mills, the kind of white-shoe law firm that specialized in cleaning up messes for families who considered themselves too important to bleed like everyone else. Kathleen watched the young man fidget in her deliberately shabby Brooklyn office. His eyes darting over the peeling wallpaper and second-hand furniture she'd staged with meticulous care. Miss Salcedo, he began, pushing wire-rimmed glasses up his nose. My clients wish to discuss a matter of mutual benefit. Kathleen looked up from her laptop. Playing the part perfectly. Worn cardigan, minimal makeup, the exhaustion of someone who counted pennies, not portfolios. I'm listening. 20 minutes later, he was gone, and the cream-colored envelope sat on her desk like a grenade. Marcus arrived within the hour, letting himself in with the key she'd given him to this identity. This carefully constructed lie. You called the emergency signal, he said, locking the door behind him. What happened? Kathleen handed him the envelope without a word. She watched his face change as he read, confusion giving way to alarm. Kathleen, this is perfect, she finished. This is perfect. This is insane. Marcus dropped into the folding chair across from her. They want you to marry Richard Wilson. To actually marry him. I know what it says, Marcus. Do you understand what you'd be walking into? The Wilson family is notorious. The father is a predator, the mother is complicit, and the extended family, they're vultures circling a dying empire. They'll eat you alive the moment they what? Kathleen's voice went cold, her carefully maintained accent slipping. Discover I'm Kathleen Montgomery. That the broke consultant they're trying to use as a publicity stunt actually owns 40% of their debt. That I've spent 8 years systematically dismantling everything James Wilson built on my father's corpse. Marcus stared at her. In this shabby office, surrounded by the trappings of struggle, she looked nothing like the billionaire heiress who'd walked away from her inheritance to become invisible. To become patient, to become lethal. You're really going to do this, he said quietly. I've been waiting for this invitation since I was 12 years old. Kathleen stood, walking to the window that overlooked a bodega and a subway entrance. Since I watched my father collapse in our living room because the stress of what Wilson did to him literally stopped his heart. Since I sat at his funeral and watched James Wilson send flowers with a card that said, deepest sympathies, like he hadn't spent 6 months destroying my father's reputation, stealing his patents, and blacklisting him from every boardroom in the city. And Richard? Marcus asked. Our intelligence suggests he's nothing like his father. Then he'll prove it, Kathleen turned. And Marcus saw something dangerous in her eyes. This marriage gives me access to everything, their home, their files, their secrets. But it also gives me time with Richard Wilson, time to watch him. Time to see if he's his father's son, or if there's something worth saving in that family. And if he's innocent, Kathleen was quiet for a long moment. Then I'll give him a choice before I burn his family's legacy to ash. But Marcus, I need to know. I need to look him in the eyes and see if he knew what his father did. If he benefited from my father's death and did nothing. Marcus stood, recognizing the finality in her voice. When do you want to accept? Tomorrow, Kathleen smiled, cold and certain. Let them think I'm desperate. Let them think they're saving me. When really? I'm the wolf they just invited into their house. The Wilson estate looked like old money trying to remember its glory days. Kathleen stepped out of the town car she'd deliberately chosen over a limousine. Her simple white gown catching autumn light that filtered through trees older than the family's scandals. No bridesmaids, no family, no flowers beyond the single lily she carried. She designed her entrance the way generals plan invasions, every detail calculated to trigger their contempt. It worked beautifully. Is that the bride? A woman's voice carried across the lawn, pitched to wound. I thought Richard said she was a professional. She looks like she's here to serve the champagne. Kathleen didn't flinch. She climbed the steps to where the ceremony would take place, aware of eyes tracking her like predators assessing prey. The Wilson family clustered in expensive fabrics and inherited jewelry, their expressions ranging from curiosity to naked disdain. Victoria Wilson materialized first, a blonde viper in Chanel. Richard's cousin, Kathleen had read. Trust fund baby, 3 failed marriages, a cocaine habit the family paid tabloids to ignore. Well, Victoria said, circling Kathleen like a shark. Aren't you precious? Did you get that dress at a sample sale, honey? Or is it borrowed? She fingered the lace at Kathleen's shoulder. Definitely borrowed. The alterations are tragic. It's mine, Kathleen said softly, playing the part. Humble, grateful beneath them. Of course it is. Victoria's smile was surgical. Richard always did have a savior complex, though I have to say this is a new low even for him. What did you do? Threatened to go to the press about the family's little financial troubles. Victoria! The voice cut through the cruelty like a blade. That's enough. Kathleen looked up to see Richard Wilson for the first time in person. And something in her chest tightened unexpectedly. He was taller than his photograph suggested, with dark hair slightly disheveled. His tuxedo immaculate but worn with discomfort. But it was his eyes that caught her, deep brown and filled with something she hadn't anticipated. Shame, I apologize for my cousin, Richard said, stepping between them. She forgets her manners when she's day drinking. Victoria's face flushed crimson. I was just making conversation. You were being cruel. Richard turned to Kathleen. And she saw him really look at her, not through her. I'm sorry, for her, for this circus, for all of it. You deserve better than this family's dysfunction. Before Kathleen could respond, an older woman approached, dripping in pearls that probably cost more than most people's houses. Richard's Aunt Margaret, her eyes swept over Kathleen with the warmth of a tax audit. Can she even read the vows? Margaret asked Richard as if Kathleen were invisible. I mean, where did you find this girl? Do we know anything about her education? Her background, for all we know, she's illiterate. Aunt Margaret, Richard's voice went dangerous. But Kathleen touched his arm gently, stopping him. I can read, she said quietly, meeting Margaret's eyes with perfect humility. I have a master's degree in business administration from Columbia. But I understand your concern, Mrs. Wilson. This must be difficult for your family. The kindness in her response seemed to throw them off balance. Margaret's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Columbia, Victoria snorted. Let me guess, scholarship student, diversity admission. Yes, Kathleen lied smoothly. I was very fortunate. She'd actually been valedictorian. Legacy admission through her father's name before Wilson destroyed it. But they didn't need to know that. Let them think she was grateful. Let them think she was weak. Richard's jaw clenched. We're done here. The ceremony is starting. He offered Kathleen his arm, and she saw it again. That genuine shame radiating from him like heat. I'm sorry, he said quietly, just for her. I know this isn't what you signed up for. I know you're doing this because you need the money, and my family's mess somehow became your problem. I'll make sure they leave you alone after today. Kathleen took his arm, feeling the solid warmth of him through expensive fabric. This was the moment, the test. She studied his profile as they walked toward the makeshift altar, searching for any sign of his father's cruelty, any hint of the man who'd killed her father with paperwork and lies. All she saw was decency wrapped in inherited guilt. "You're not what I expected," she said truthfully. Richard laughed, bitter and sad. "Neither are you. You're far too good for this family. I promise I'll make sure the year goes by quickly, and you'll walk away with everything we agreed to. You have my word." As they took their positions, Kathleen felt something shift in her carefully constructed plan. Richard Wilson wasn't supposed to be kind. He wasn't supposed to look at her like she mattered, like she was a person rather than a transaction. He wasn't supposed to make this complicated. But as the officiant began to speak, Kathleen caught Victoria's smirk, saw Margaret whisper to another aunt, and felt the contempt rolling off this family like poison. And she remembered why she was here, not for Richard, for her father, for justice. The Wilson estate staff carried Kathleen's 2 suitcases to the 3rd floor, up the servants' staircase that smelled of old wood and older resentments. Victoria had insisted on personally showing her to her room, a smile playing at her lips like a cat with a wounded bird. "Here we are," Victoria announced, throwing open a door to reveal what had clearly been a maid's quarters. A single bed with a thin mattress, a dresser missing 1 drawer, a window that overlooked the garbage bins. "I know it's cozy, but we thought you'd be comfortable here. After all, you're used to modest accommodations." Kathleen stepped inside, her face carefully neutral even as rage burned through her veins. This wasn't just cruelty. This was a message: know your place. "It's fine," she said softly. "Thank you." Victoria's disappointment at not getting a reaction was palpable. "Dinner is at 7. We dress formally. I'm sure you have something appropriate." Her eyes raked over Kathleen's simple dress. "Or perhaps you could help cook in the kitchen instead. She's always complaining about being short-staffed." The moment Victoria left, Kathleen pulled out her phone. She had 17 missed calls from Marcus, 6 encrypted messages about Wilson Holdings' quarterly reports, and 3 alerts about properties entering foreclosure. She opened the Secure app and began typing instructions. Buy the first debt. The commercial property on 5th Avenue. Let them feel the ground shift beneath their feet. She was mid-sentence when the door burst open. Richard stood there, breathing hard like he'd run up 3 flights of stairs. His eyes swept the room and something dark crossed his face. "No," he said flatly. "Absolutely not. I'm sorry. This is unacceptable." Richard was already grabbing her suitcases. "You're my wife, not the help. I don't care what Victoria said. You're not staying in the servants' quarters." "Richard." "It's fine. It's not fine." He turned and she saw genuine anger there, but not directed at her. At his family, at himself. "The master bedroom is empty, my father's old room. It's yours now." Kathleen followed him down 2 flights, through hallways lined with portraits of Wilson ancestors, who all seemed to share the same expression of casual superiority. The master bedroom was obscenely large, all dark wood and heavy furniture. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking manicured gardens. "I'll take the guest room in the east wing," Richard said, setting down her suitcases. "We'll share the adjoining bathroom, but I'll make sure to respect your privacy. If my family gives you any trouble, you come to me directly." "Understood." He was standing in the doorway, backlit by hallway light. And Kathleen realized this was the moment her careful plan began to crack. Because Richard Wilson wasn't supposed to care where she slept. He wasn't supposed to look personally offended by his family's cruelty. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. Richard was quiet for a long moment. "Because someone in this family should remember what decency looks like. My father forgot, my mother never learned, but I'm trying to be better than the name I inherited." He met her eyes. "I know you married me for money, Kathleen. I know this is a transaction. But that doesn't mean I have to let them treat you like you're worthless." After he left, Kathleen stood in the center of the master bedroom, surrounded by luxury built on her father's ruin. She should feel triumphant. The Wilsons had handed her the keys to their kingdom just as she'd planned. Instead, she felt the weight of Richard's kindness like a stone in her chest. Her phone buzzed. "Marcus." The Fifth Avenue property is ours. Wilson Holdings just lost its flagship commercial space. They don't know it yet, but the foreclosure notice hits tomorrow. Are you sure you want to proceed? Kathleen looked around the room. At the evidence of wealth accumulated through decades of destroying families like hers. She thought of her father's watch stopped at 3:47. She thought of 12-year-old Kathleen at a funeral, watching James Wilson's flowers arrive with their empty condolences. Then she thought of Richard, carrying her suitcases up from the servants' quarters. His face tight with shame he didn't deserve. Proceed, she typed back. But Marcus, I need everything you can find on Richard Wilson. Everything, school records, employment history, every email, every transaction. I need to know if he knew what his father did. Why? Kathleen sat on the edge of the massive bed. Her reflection caught in an antique mirror. She looked small in this room built for titans. Because I need to know if I'm destroying an innocent man along with his guilty family. The response came quickly. And if he's innocent, Kathleen didn't answer, she couldn't. Because she'd spent 20 years planning this revenge. Building her fortune in secret. Becoming invisible so she could strike from the shadows. She'd never planned for Richard Wilson to be decent. She'd never planned for the possibility that justice might come with collateral damage she'd actually regret. Hey, real quick, if you're loving this story of revenge, secrets, and unexpected romance, do me a huge favor and hit that subscribe button. We've got more incredible stories coming your way, and trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next in Kathleen's journey. Ring that notification bell too, because things are about to get even more intense. Now back to the story. Kathleen found Richard in the library 3 nights later, surrounded by ledgers, and looking like a man trying to bail out the Titanic with a teaspoon. The fire cast shadows across his face, making him look older than his 34 years. He didn't notice her at first, too focused on the columns of numbers that she knew told the story of a dying empire. You should be asleep, he said without looking up. It's past midnight, so should you? Kathleen stepped inside, closing the door behind her. She'd spent the evening reviewing Marcus's report on Richard, and every page had complicated her plan further. What are you working on? Richard laughed, sharp and humorless. Trying to figure out how to pay the groundskeeping staff. My mother fired them last week because she needed money for a charity gala. The irony is apparently lost on her. Can't the company cover it? The company, Richard set down his pen, rubbing his eyes. The company is bleeding money because my father spent 30 years making enemies and cutting corners. Every deal was dirty, every partnership built on leverage and threats. I've spent the last 5 years trying to clean it up, but it's like trying to wash blood out of silk. The stain goes too deep. Kathleen moved closer, genuinely curious now. Why try? You could walk away. And go where? Richard looked up at her, and she saw exhaustion mixed with something harder. Determination. This company has my name on it, Kathleen. Every person my father screwed over. Every family he destroyed for profit. They all see the Wilson name and think we're all the same. Maybe they're right, maybe I'm complicit just by staying. Are you? The question came out sharper than she intended. Richard stood, walking to the window that overlooked the grounds his family could barely afford to maintain. I didn't know at first. I was young, stupid, and believed my father when he said business was complicated. That sometimes you had to be ruthless to survive. He pressed his forehead against the glass. Then I found files, contracts where he'd stolen patents. Emails where he'd blacklisted competitors who wouldn't sell to him. Evidence of bribes, threats, lives ruined because they stood in his way. Kathleen's heart hammered. What did you do? I confronted him. Demanded he make it right, return what he'd stolen and compensate the families. Richard's laugh was bitter. He looked at me like I was insane, said I was soft, that I'd destroy the company with my conscience. We didn't speak for 2 years before he died, and after I tried to fix it. Quietly, I've been selling everything I own that isn't nailed down. My car collection, my mother's jewelry that was technically mine. Investments my father left me personally. He turned to face her. There's a groundskeeper here, Miguel. Been with the family for 30 years. My father fired him without severance because he asked for a raise. I tracked him down, gave him everything I owed him plus interest. There are others. I have a list. Kathleen felt something crack inside her carefully constructed walls. How many? 17 families so far. Some accepted the money. Others told me to go to hell. I don't blame them. Money doesn't bring back lost years or dead dreams. Richard's eyes were dark with pain she recognized. But it's all I can offer. Apologies written in checks. Trying to buy back a soul I'm not sure this family ever had. Your family doesn't know. They'd stop me. Say I'm wasting assets, that those people don't deserve restitution, that business is business. He moved closer to her. That's why I agreed to this marriage, Kathleen. Not because my mother pressured me, or because the company needs good publicity. I agreed because the contract gives me access to liquid assets I can use to keep paying people back. I know you think you married a desperate man clinging to a sinking ship. But I'm trying to sink it honorably. Kathleen couldn't breathe. Every word out of Richard's mouth was destroying her certainty, her carefully nurtured rage. You're trying to destroy your own family's company. I'm trying to transform it. To build something clean from the ashes. Richard smiled sadly. Naive, right? My father would call me a traitor. Victoria calls me weak. Maybe they're right. They're not. The words came out before Kathleen could stop them. Richard looked at her with something like hope. You don't have to say that. I'm not saying it to be kind. Kathleen's mind raced. Richard Wilson wasn't his father's son. He was trying to undo exactly what she'd planned to destroy. Richard, this list of families, do you have their names? He hesitated, then pulled a worn notebook from his desk drawer. Kathleen opened it with shaking hands. 17 names, 17 amounts paid, 17 dates of her husband's secret restitution. Her father's name wasn't there, because Richard didn't know. James Wilson had hidden that particular crime too well. After Richard finally went to bed, Kathleen sat in the library with her phone. The unsigned contracts from Marcus glowing on the screen. The second Wilson debt, a manufacturing facility in Ohio. One signature and it would be hers, one more piece of the empire crumbling. Her finger hovered over the digital signature line. She thought of Richard's notebook, his list of debts he couldn't possibly know he owed. She thought of a man trying to buy back his family's soul with everything he owned. She thought of her father and what he would say if he knew she was hesitating. Kathleen signed the papers. The manufacturing facility was hers. But as she sent the documents back to Marcus, she added a note. Find out if Richard Wilson ever tried to investigate the Montgomery case. I need to know what he knows, because if Richard was truly innocent, if he was truly trying to make amends, then her revenge had just become infinitely more complicated and infinitely more painful. The charity gala at the Metropolitan Club was exactly the kind of performance Kathleen had anticipated. Old money in new gowns, champagne that cost more than most people's rent, and the Wilson family working the room like politicians before an election. Kathleen had dressed simply again. A black cocktail dress she'd deliberately chosen from a mid-range department store, letting them see exactly what they expected. She was speaking with Jonathan Pierce from Manhattan Trust when Victoria's radar locked on. Kathleen saw her cousin-in-law's eyes narrow across the ballroom, watched her calculate and scheme before excusing herself from her own conversation. Thank you for the information, Mr. Pierce, Kathleen said, finishing her discussion about the Ohio manufacturing facility. The one she now owned, though Pierce didn't know his client was standing in front of him. I appreciate your time. Of course, Miss Salcedo, or should I say Mrs. Wilson now, Pierce smiled politely. Please give my regards to your husband. He'd barely walked away when Victoria materialized like a bad smell. Well, bothering the bankers already. What's wrong, honey? Is Richard's allowance not enough? Are you already trying to squeeze more money out of this family? I was just having a conversation, Kathleen said evenly. A conversation. Victoria's voice rose just enough to attract attention. About what? How much you can borrow? Whether they'll give loans to gold diggers with no collateral. She circled Kathleen like a predator. You know what I think? I think you need a reminder of where you actually stand in this family. Before Kathleen could respond, Victoria snapped her fingers at a passing waiter. Excuse me, we're short on servers. This young woman has graciously volunteered to help. She grabbed a tray of champagne flutes and shoved it into Kathleen's hands. There you go, sweetheart, make yourself useful. The ballroom had gone quiet, sensing blood in the water. Kathleen felt dozens of eyes on her, heard the whispers start like wildfire. Victoria's smile was triumphant, malicious. Victoria, that's unnecessary, someone started. Nonsense, Victoria interrupted loudly. She married into this family for money. The least she can do is earn it. Consider this your job training, Kathleen. Start with my friends over there, and do try to smile. Good help is so hard to find these days. Kathleen stood frozen, not with humiliation but with rage. She could end this with one phone call. Could have Victoria's trust fund frozen, her credit destroyed, her entire entitled existence crumbling before dessert. But that would blow her cover, reveal her hand too soon. So she took a breath, preparing to play the victim one more time. What the hell is going on here? Richard's voice cut through the ballroom like thunder. He strode toward them, his face dark with fury Kathleen had never seen before. Victoria, what did you do? I was just having some fun. Fun, Richard reached Kathleen, gently taking the tray from her hands and setting it on a nearby table. You humiliated my wife in front of half of New York society for fun. Oh, please, Richard. Everyone knows she's just a... Say one more word. Richard's voice went deadly quiet. I dare you. Say one more degrading thing about my wife, and I will personally ensure you never receive another cent from the Wilson estate. Not from the trust, not from the company, nothing. Victoria's face went white. You can't do that. I'm the primary executor of our family trust, Victoria. Watch me. He turned to address the room, his arm moving protectively around Kathleen's shoulders. My wife is not entertainment. She is not the help. She is Kathleen Wilson, and anyone who treats her as anything less can consider themselves uninvited from every Wilson function for the foreseeable future. The silence was absolute. Victoria stood there, champagne glass trembling in her hand, her social assassination backfiring spectacularly. We're leaving, Richard said to Kathleen. You don't have to stay here and be subjected to this. Richard. I'm fine, you shouldn't have to be fine with this. His jaw was tight, a muscle jumping beneath his skin. I'm sorry for her, for all of them. This family has forgotten what basic human decency looks like. As he led her toward the exit, Kathleen heard Victoria's voice, shrill and desperate. You're choosing her over your own blood. Richard didn't even turn around. My blood has given me nothing but shame, Victoria. At least Kathleen has dignity. In the car, Richard's hands shook with residual anger. I should have done that years ago. Cut her off, cut them all off. They're poison. Kathleen watched him in the dim light. This man who just burned family bridges to defend a wife he thought was a stranger. A wife he believed was beneath his station, marrying him for money, yet he'd protected her anyway. You didn't have to do that, she said softly. Yes, I did, Richard met her eyes. You're not their punching bag, Kathleen. I don't care what the contract says. I don't care why you married me. No one deserves what Victoria did tonight. Kathleen felt something dangerous bloom in her chest. Something that felt suspiciously like guilt, like affection. Like the beginning of emotions that had no place in her carefully planned revenge. Thank you, she whispered, and meant it. Later that night, alone in the master bedroom, Kathleen pulled up the Ohio manufacturing facility files on her laptop. 200 employees would lose their jobs when she shuttered it as planned. 200 families will be affected by her next move against the Wilsons. Families that Richard would probably try to help by selling more of his possessions and adding more names to his notebook of restitution. Her phone buzzed. Marcus, Victoria Wilson just liquidated $200K in stocks. Looks like Richard made good on his threat. Also, I found something about the Montgomery case. Call me. Kathleen stared at the message, her finger hovering over the call button. Outside her door, she heard Richard moving in the guest room, restless. Probably still angry, probably still feeling guilty for his family's cruelty. Probably having no idea that the woman he defended tonight owned the very ground his family stood on, and was planning to pull it out from under them. Kathleen didn't mean for Richard to find her. She'd waited until 2 a.m., until the house was silent and dark, before allowing herself to break. The library seemed safest, most private. She sat on the floor beneath her father's favorite author's collected works, Steinbeck. Another thing the Wilsons had unknowingly stolen, and let 20 years of grief finally crack through her armor. Marcus's report lay open on her laptop. Richard had investigated. 5 years ago, he'd found his father's files on the Montgomery case and spent 6 months trying to track down James Montgomery's family. To apologize, to make restitution. But Kathleen had disappeared too thoroughly, hidden behind trusts and shell companies and a new last name. Richard had eventually given up, writing in his notes. Unable to locate Montgomery heirs, debt remains unpaid. Father destroyed this man, and I can't even find his family to say I'm sorry. The knowledge hurt worse than any of Victoria's cruelty. Richard had tried, he'd looked for her, and she'd been invisible by design, plotting revenge against a man who wanted to make things right. She didn't hear him enter, didn't know he was there until his voice, soft and concerned, cut through her tears. Kathleen, she looked up, mascara streaking her face, completely exposed. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Richard crossed the room and sat beside her on the floor, not touching, just present. I'm sorry, she managed. I didn't mean to, I thought everyone was asleep. I couldn't sleep. Richard's eyes swept over her face, reading the pain she'd kept hidden for weeks. What happened? Kathleen almost lied, almost said it was nothing, stress, adjustment to her new life. But something in Richard's genuine concern, in the way he defended her at the gala, in the notebook of debts he was trying to repay, made her want to tell him the truth. Or at least part of it. My father, she said, her voice breaking. I lost my father to people like your family. People who saw human beings as obstacles, who valued profit over lives, who destroyed anyone who stood in their way. Richard went very still. Tell me, he was a businessman, a good one, honest, ethical, everything your father wasn't. The words came out bitter, sharp. Someone more powerful wanted what he'd built. They took it. Stole his patents, destroyed his reputation, and blacklisted him from the industry. The stress killed him. Literally stopped his heart while I watched. God, Kathleen, I was 12. She wiped at her tears angrily. 12 years old, and I had to watch my father die, because someone decided their greed was worth more than his life. And you know what the worst part was? The people who destroyed him sent flowers to his funeral. Flowers and a card that said deepest sympathies. Like they hadn't murdered him with paperwork and lies. Richard's face had gone pale. Who was it? Who did this to your father? Kathleen looked at him. At this man who'd spent 5 years trying to undo his father's sins, and felt her carefully constructed revenge plan crumble. Does it matter? They're all the same. These families, these dynasties, built on other people's broken dreams. Your family, my father's enemies, you're all part of the same machine that eats people and spits out profit margins. We're not all the same. Richard's voice was fierce. Kathleen, look at me. I know my father was a monster. I know this family has done unspeakable things, but I'm trying to be different. I'm trying to pay back what we owe, to build something better from the ashes. Why? The question came out as a sob. Why do you care? You could walk away, start over somewhere else. Pretend the Wilson name isn't covered in blood. Because someone has to break the cycle. Richard reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he took her hand. Someone has to stand up and say this isn't who we are anymore. That we can be better than our fathers. Better than the names we inherited. Kathleen looked at their joined hands, his skin warm against hers. What if it's too late? What if some debts can't be repaid? Then at least I'll die trying. Richard's thumb traced circles on her palm. Your father, what was his name? She almost told him. Almost said James Montgomery. Almost watched his face change as he connected the dots. But something held her back. Fear, maybe. or the selfish desire to have this moment, this connection, before everything exploded. "It doesn't matter anymore," she whispered instead. "He's gone." Richard pulled her close then, and Kathleen let herself be held. Let herself pretend, just for a moment, that she was really Kathleen Salcedo, a woman who'd married a complicated man and was slowly falling for him despite herself. Not Kathleen Montgomery, billionaire heiress, orchestrating his family's downfall. "I'm not like them," Richard said into her hair. "I promise you, Kathleen. Whatever happened to your father, whatever people like my family did to destroy good people, I'm trying to make it right." "All of it, I know," Kathleen said, and she did. That was the problem. She was falling in love with the one person she was supposed to destroy. They stayed like that until dawn, wrapped in each other on the library floor. The laptop screen casting blue light over Marcus's report. The report that proved Richard's innocence, that complicated everything. That made Kathleen's revenge feel less like justice and more like cruelty. When Richard finally fell asleep, his head against her shoulder, Kathleen pulled out her phone with her free hand. She typed a message to Marcus: "Pause all acquisitions." "I need time to think," the response came quickly. "Kathleen, you're 3 moves from checkmate. Don't tell me you're backing out now." She looked at Richard, peaceful in sleep, unburdened for once from the weight of his family's sins. "Not backing out," she typed back. "Just reconsidering the collateral damage. Because somewhere between the servants' quarters and the gala and this library floor, Kathleen had stopped seeing Richard Wilson as her enemy's son, and started seeing him as the man she was terrified she might actually love. The foreclosure notices arrived on a Thursday morning, delivered by 3 separate courier services within an hour of each other. Kathleen was in the breakfast room when she heard Margaret's scream from the study. A sound of pure financial terror that would have been satisfying 6 weeks ago. Now it just made her stomach twist. "What is the meaning of this?" Margaret burst into the room, waving papers like weapons. Victoria followed, her face pale. Behind them came Richard's uncle, Thomas, a man whose resemblance to James Wilson made Kathleen's skin crawl. "We're being foreclosed on 3 properties. The 5th Avenue commercial building, the Ohio manufacturing facility, the Connecticut summer house." Richard looked up from his coffee, his expression shifting from confusion to concern. "That's impossible. We've been making payments." "Apparently not," Thomas interrupted, his cold eyes sliding to Kathleen. "These debts were sold to anonymous investors months ago. Someone's been buying up our obligations, and now they're calling them due. All of them simultaneously." The room's attention shifted to Kathleen like a spotlight. She kept her expression carefully neutral, even as her heart hammered. Too soon. This was happening too soon. "You think I did this?" she asked quietly. "Didn't you?" Victoria's voice was sharp with accusation. "You show up out of nowhere, marry into this family, and suddenly we're hemorrhaging assets. That's quite a coincidence." "That's insane," Richard said, standing. "Kathleen doesn't have access to that kind of capital. These are multi-million-dollar debts. Maybe she has friends who do," Thomas suggested darkly. "Maybe this whole marriage was a setup. Get inside the family, feed information to corporate raiders. Help them pick us apart from the inside." Margaret nodded vigorously. "It makes perfect sense. Richard, you need to divorce her immediately, before she does any more damage. I'm not divorcing my wife based on paranoid conspiracy theories. It's not paranoia when we're losing everything." Thomas slammed his fist on the table. 3 properties, Richard, gone. That's not bad luck, that's sabotage. She's probably been feeding our financial information to competitors since day 1. Kathleen watched Richard's face. Saw him processing, calculating. Saw the moment doubt flickered across his features before he crushed it down. "No," he said firmly. "I know Kathleen, she wouldn't do this." "You don't know anything about her," Victoria spat. "None of us do. She appeared out of nowhere with no family, no background worth mentioning, and a very convenient need for money. We never even properly vetted her." "Because you were desperate," Kathleen said, her voice carrying an edge she couldn't quite suppress. "You needed someone, anyone, to make this family look stable." "I was convenient," Thomas's eyes narrowed. That almost sounds like you're admitting to something. I'm admitting that this family was failing long before I arrived. Kathleen said, meeting his gaze without flinching. Your son-in-law's corruption, your sister's spending, your own mismanagement. You're looking for a scapegoat, and I'm the easiest target. Richard, Margaret's voice turned pleading. Please look at what's happening. These foreclosures started right after she moved in. You have to see the pattern. Richard was quiet for a long moment, and Kathleen felt the weight of his scrutiny. She'd prepared for this, rehearsed her denials. But looking at his face, at the man who defended her, protected her, started to trust her, the lies stuck in her throat. The only pattern I see, Richard said slowly, is this family's inability to take responsibility for its own failures. We're losing properties because father took out loans against them to cover his gambling debts. Because mother spent a fortune redecorating houses we couldn't afford. Because all of you treated the company like a personal piggy bank for decades. So you're choosing her over us? Thomas's voice went cold. I'm choosing honesty over delusion. Richard moved to stand beside Kathleen. And honestly, Kathleen is the only person in this house who isn't actively trying to bleed this family dry. If she wanted to destroy us, she's had plenty of opportunities. She's seen every ugly secret, every financial disaster, and she's stayed. How noble, Victoria sneered. Or maybe she's just waiting for the right moment to strike. The words hung in the air like prophecy. Kathleen felt Richard's hand find hers, his fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture of solidarity that made her chest ache. Get out, Richard said to his uncle, all of you. I'm done listening to baseless accusations. After they left, the breakfast room felt cavernous. Richard still held her hand, his thumb tracing patterns on her palm. I'm sorry. They're scared, and scared people lash out. What if they're right? Kathleen asked, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Richard turned to face her fully. Are they? The question was simple. The answer was nuclear. Kathleen looked at this man who'd given her nothing but kindness, who defended her against his own blood, who believed she was honest when she was the biggest liar in the room. No, she said, the lie tasting like ash. Of course not, but as Richard pulled her into an embrace, as she felt his heart beating against hers, Kathleen knew the truth was coming. The web had tightened around the Wilsons, but she was caught in it too. And when it finally snapped, everyone was going to bleed. Later, in the privacy of the master bedroom, her phone lit up with Marcus's message. They're starting to investigate. We need to move the timeline up. How soon can you execute the final phase? Kathleen stared at the message. Then at the wall that separated her from Richard's guest room. She could hear him pacing, probably still angry at his family, probably still defending her in his mind. She typed back, soon, but Marcus, I need to tell him first, before the board meeting. He deserves to know. That's a mistake, he'll warn them. He won't. I know him. You've known him for 6 weeks, Kathleen. Don't let feelings compromise 20 years of planning. But that was the problem, wasn't it? 6 weeks, and Richard Wilson had done what she thought was impossible. He'd made her question everything. The emergency board meeting was called for 10 o'clock on a Monday morning. Kathleen watched from the master bedroom window as board members arrived in black cars, their expressions grim. The Wilson empire was hemorrhaging, and they'd gathered to stop the bleeding or declare time of death. She dressed carefully, not the simple clothes of Kathleen Salcedo, the pitied bride. A tailored charcoal suit that cost more than most cars, Laubautin heels, and her grandmother's diamond earrings. Her father's company pin on her lapel. She pulled her hair back severely, applied makeup with precision, and looked at herself in the mirror. Kathleen Montgomery stared back. Marcus had arrived an hour earlier with the final documents. You're sure about this? He'd asked. Once you walk in there, there's no going back. I've been sure for 20 years. But as she walked down the stairs toward the boardroom, her hands shook, because Richard was in there, sitting at the head of his father's table, trying to save a company that was already dead. He just didn't know his wife had killed it. The boardroom doors were mahogany, heavy with the weight of generations. Kathleen pushed them open without knocking. 12 faces turned toward her. Confusion, then irritation. Margaret half rose from her seat. Kathleen, this is a private board meeting. You can't just— Sit down, Margaret. Kathleen's voice was different now. No longer soft, no longer deferential. It carried the authority of someone who owned things. Who owned them? I'm exactly where I need to be. Richard stood, his expression shifting from surprise to concern. Kathleen, what's going on? She walked to the head of the table, to the empty seat beside Richard that no one had dared take. She set down her briefcase with deliberate precision. My name is not Kathleen Salcedo, she began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. It's Kathleen Salcedo Montgomery, daughter of James Montgomery, the man whose company James Wilson destroyed 23 years ago. The silence was absolute. Then chaos. What is she talking about? Thomas demanded. Security, Victoria shrieked. Get her out of here. But Marcus had entered behind Kathleen, followed by Jonathan Pierce from Manhattan Trust and 2 lawyers carrying bankers' boxes. They began distributing documents around the table with mechanical efficiency. What you're looking at, Kathleen continued, her voice cutting through the panic, are the deeds, contracts, and debt obligations I've purchased over the past 8 months. The Fifth Avenue property, the Ohio manufacturing facility, the Connecticut estate, the corporate bonds your father took out in 2019, the commercial loans from 2021. I own 47% of Wilson Holdings' outstanding debt. Pierce stepped forward. As of this morning, Ms. Montgomery also holds proxy votes from 3 additional board members who have agreed to sell their shares. Combined with the debt-to-equity conversion options in the loan documents, she now controls 51% of this company. The room erupted. Margaret looked like she might faint. Thomas was screaming about lawsuits. Victoria was frantically typing on her phone, probably calling lawyers who couldn't help her. But Kathleen only watched Richard. He hadn't moved, hadn't spoken. He just stared at her like he was seeing a stranger, his face cycling through shock, realization, and something that looked devastatingly like betrayal. You, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. This whole time, your father stole my father's patents, Kathleen said, needing him to understand even as she watched his world collapse. The microprocessor design that made Wilson Tech profitable for a decade. That was my father's work. James Wilson copied it, filed it under his own name. And when my father tried to fight back legally, your father destroyed him. Blacklisted him from every tech company in the country. Ruined his reputation so thoroughly that investors fled, partners abandoned him. And the stress literally killed him. That's a lie, Margaret hissed. James would never— I have the emails. Kathleen nodded to Marcus, who pulled out a thick file. Every communication between your husband and his lawyers discussing how to neutralize the Montgomery problem. I have the falsified patent applications. The payoffs to witnesses who would testify against my father's claims. 23 years of evidence that James Wilson built his empire on my father's corpse. Richard's hands were flat on the table, like he needed something solid to hold on to. Did you know, he asked Thomas, his uncle, about what father did to Montgomery? Thomas's silence was answer enough. You all knew, Richard said, looking around the table at his family. You knew, and you let me grow up thinking he was some kind of visionary. That this company was built on innovation and hard work. Richard, business is complicated, Margaret started. Don't, his voice cracked like a whip. Don't you dare defend him. He turned back to Kathleen, and she saw tears in his eyes that gutted her. And you married me for this. To get close enough to destroy us. Yes, Kathleen said, because he deserved the truth even if it destroyed them both. The kindness, the conversations, Richard's voice broke. When I defended you, when I told you about trying to make amends, he couldn't finish. Did you ever care? The question came out raw, wounded. Or was I just part of the plan? Kathleen opened her mouth to answer. To say yes, it was all calculated. To say no, she'd never meant to fall for him. To say something that would make this easier. But the truth stuck in her throat, too complicated and too painful to voice. Because she had cared, she did care, and that made everything so much worse. I can't answer that, she whispered, Richard flinched as she struck him. He stood slowly, carefully, like a man made of breaking glass. "Then I guess you already have." He walked out of the boardroom without looking back. The door closed behind him with a finality that echoed in Kathleen's chest like a death knell. She'd won, the company was hers, the Wilsons were ruined, justice was served. So why did victory taste like grief? Richard's room was empty by nightfall. His clothes gone, his books removed. Even the photo of his parents he kept on the nightstand, despite everything. All of it vanished like he had never existed. Kathleen stood in the doorway of the guest room he'd occupied for their entire marriage. The room he'd moved to so she could have the master bedroom. And felt something inside her shatter completely. She'd won, Wilson Holdings was hers. The family that destroyed her father was ruined. Justice cold and complete, the victory felt like ashes. Marcus found her there 3 hours later, still standing in the empty room. "The board has officially voted you in as majority shareholder and CEO. Margaret and Thomas have already retained lawyers, but the contracts are airtight. Victoria liquidated her remaining trust fund and left for the Hamptons. The estate is legally yours as of this afternoon." "Where did Richard go?" Kathleen's voice sounded hollow. "His apartment in the city, the one he's been quietly maintaining." Marcus hesitated. "Kathleen, you did it, everything you planned for 20 years. Your father would be proud. Would he?" Kathleen wasn't sure anymore. She walked to the master bedroom, to her father's photograph she'd hidden in her nightstand. James Montgomery smiled up at her, young and vibrant, before James Wilson destroyed him. "I got them, Daddy," she whispered. "I got justice for you," but the photo just stared back, silent. And Kathleen realized her father couldn't tell her if the cost had been worth it. Couldn't tell her if destroying the Wilsons while falling in love with one of them made her victory hollow or complete. She spent 5 days in the estate alone, surrounded by wealth built on blood, planning the dismantling of Wilson Holdings. She would liquidate the corrupt divisions, compensate the families her father-in-law had destroyed, and salt the earth where James Wilson's empire once stood. It should have felt triumphant. Instead, it felt like mourning. On the 6th day, she heard the front door open. Kathleen's heart lurched as footsteps echoed through the hallway, coming closer. She stood from the desk in the study, hardly daring to breathe. Richard appeared in the doorway, and he looked like he'd aged years in less than a week. Shadows under his eyes, hair disheveled, but his expression was calm, resolved. "You came back," Kathleen said, her voice cracking. "I never should have left." Richard stepped inside, carrying a weathered box. "I needed time to process, to be angry, to decide if I could forgive what you did." And she braced herself for the final blow. The final piece of her life crumbling. "I went through my father's files." Richard set the box on the desk. "The ones he kept locked in his private office. I've been trying to get access for years, but my mother blocked me. After the board meeting, after you took control, I realized the locks didn't matter anymore. So I broke in." He opened the box, and Kathleen saw documents, emails, and contracts. "Everything you said was true, everything and worse. Your father wasn't his only victim. There were others, dozens of others. Small business owners, inventors, and partners he betrayed. I found a file on James Montgomery specifically." Richard pulled out a folder, his hands shaking. "He didn't just steal your father's patents, Kathleen. He had him investigated, found his medical history, and knew he had a heart condition. There's an email where my father told his lawyer that the stress of the lawsuit would solve the problem naturally." Kathleen's hand flew to her mouth. "He killed him deliberately. He weaponized the legal system, knowing it would destroy your father's health." Richard's voice was thick with disgust. "That's not business. That's murder. Why are you showing me this?" Richard looked at her with red-rimmed eyes that held no anger, only grief. "Because you deserved more than revenge, Kathleen. You deserved someone to validate that what happened to your father was evil. That your rage was righteous." He moved closer. "And because I spent 5 days hating you for lying to me, I realized something. You were 12 when your father died. You've spent 20 years planning this, building your empire in secret, becoming invisible so you could strike. That's not just revenge. That's dedication born from love. Richard, let me finish. He took her hands and she felt them trembling. I don't blame you for what you did. I would have done the same, probably worse. What I need to know is whether you meant any of it. The conversations, the quiet moments. The night after Victoria humiliated you, and you thanked me like I'd done something heroic. His voice dropped to a whisper. Did any of it mean something, or was it all part of the plan? Kathleen felt tears streaming down her face. I didn't plan to fall in love with you. That was never supposed to happen. But did it? Richard asked. Did it happen? Yes, the word tore out of her. God help me, yes. I fell in love with a man who was trying to undo everything his father built. Who sold his possessions to pay back people he'd never met. Who defended me when his family attacked me, even though he thought I was nobody. You showed me that wealth isn't measured in billions or revenge or justice. It's measured in integrity. In choosing to be better than the name you inherited. Richard pulled her into his arms. And they stood there in the study that had belonged to his father. Surrounded by evidence of evil, holding each other like lifelines. So what do we do now? He asked finally. Kathleen pulled back, looking at the box of evidence. At the company papers scattered across the desk, at the empire she'd seized. We build something better, not Wilson Holdings, not Montgomery Enterprises. Something new, the Montgomery Wilson Foundation, Richard said. We use the company's assets to support businesses harmed by corporate corruption. We compensate the families my father destroyed. We make it right. Together, Richard kissed her forehead. As equals, as partners. 6 months later, Kathleen stood in a ballroom that had once symbolized everything she hated about the Wilson family. Now it hosted the inaugural gala for the Montgomery Wilson Foundation. Filled with entrepreneurs they'd supported, families they'd compensated, and people building ethical businesses on the ashes of corruption. She wore her father's company pin on her gown, polished until it shone. Richard stood beside her in a simple suit, his wedding band catching the light. Engraved on the inside were 2 words, true wealth. Your father would be proud, Richard said softly. Kathleen looked around the room, at the good they'd built from pain. At the justice that had transformed into something larger than revenge. So would yours, she said. The man you're trying to be anyway. Richard smiled, and it reached his eyes. We're not our father's children anymore. No, Kathleen agreed, taking his hand. We're something better. As they moved through the gala, Kathleen caught her reflection in the gilded mirrors. The girl who'd watched her father die, who'd built an empire from grief. Who'd planned revenge for 20 years, she was still there. But beside her was the woman who'd learned that love could coexist with justice. That forgiveness didn't erase anger. And that sometimes the greatest victory wasn't destruction, but transformation. She'd come to the Wilson family seeking revenge. She'd left with something far more valuable. She'd left with the truth that wealth, true wealth, wasn't measured in what you could destroy, but in what you chose to build from the ruins. And in the man who stood beside her, choosing every day to be better than his legacy. She'd found a partner worth more than any empire. Margaret Wilson watched from the shadows of the gala, diminished now, living on the modest allowance they'd negotiated. She caught Kathleen's eye across the room, and for just a moment, there was something like understanding between them. The recognition that they'd both lost and gained in ways they never expected. Kathleen raised her glass in a silent acknowledgement, not forgiveness, not quite. But perhaps the beginning of something like peace. Ready? Richard asked, pulling her toward the stage where they would announce the Foundation's first major initiative. Kathleen squeezed his hand. Ready? And for the first time in 20 years, when she looked toward the future, she didn't see revenge. She saw hope. If this story of revenge, redemption, and unexpected love moved you, I need you to do 3 things right now. First, smash that like button. It helps more people find stories like this. Second, subscribe and hit that notification bell, because we've got more incredible stories coming your way every single week. And third, share this with someone who loves a good revenge story with a twist. Drop a comment below and tell me, do you think Kathleen did the right thing? Would you have chosen revenge or love? I read every single comment and I can't wait to hear what you think. Until next time, remember, true wealth isn't about what you destroy, it's about what you choose to build. See you in the next story.